to Hive and Nest, a place to thrive and be your best, and to live and raise our kids up unto the freedom with which we've been blessed. Hive and Nest Homeschool with Her Majesty Queen Bee and your Uncle Owl. All right, Hive and Nest episode one. So I figured for this episode that we could just introduce ourselves and we're just going to jump right into it. So, ladies first, Her Majesty Queen Bee, can you give us a little bit of your homeschool like history slash experience?
Hey, yeah, good morning. I go by Queen Bee. I am the homeschool maxi of the Bowtied community. I was homeschooled off and on since 1985, and I've been in the homeschool community in four different states since that time. My siblings and I were all homeschooled, and now I've homeschooled my four children. For quite a long time, I have. My oldest is in high school, and none of my children have ever attended a regular school, a conventional type school. They've always been homeschooled. I have four children. Um, I have three in middle school and one in high school. And I decided to homeschool my kids because I had been homeschooled and it was a wonderful experience. My family, my siblings and I are the first of both sides of our family to have degrees of anything over an associate's degree. And so we actually came out quite improved from our farmer family. And it's been a wonderful experience because we got to learn a lot, got to, um, hold on a second.
She's basically just the master. I mean, she doesn't even know how she's doing it so well. I mean, she can explain it, but most of the time, her go with the flow is so much better than most people's plans. It's just unbelievable.
I appreciate that. I'm kind of having a difficult time explaining it because I just grew up that way. My
Right.
parents are still in the same mindset. I was talking to my dad about how he taught math the other day. It was pretty informal, but I remember going on a road trip, and the whole time we were doing uh, percentages in our head. And so he would say, "What's 16% of 732?" And we would all just figure it out in our head like it was no big deal. So my homeschooling has been pretty similar to the way my parents homeschooled us. And I hesitate to say unschooling because we did have some assignments and stuff, and my kids have assignments. But for the most part, it's a path of learning while you live and not being afraid to learn hard stuff, but doing it in a kind of more casual way so it's not so intimidating. And then you kind of look back and, wow, what did I learn? That was pretty amazing. So that's basically the type of homeschooling I grew up in and that I'm doing now. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, I like the idea of like learning something without learning it and then you don't realize that you learned it. That's always something that like I always remember things better when I'm actually interested in it and then don't it doesn't feel like work and it just makes it so much easier to like latch on to things and my kids are the same way and yeah, I like how the it just makes it a lot easier. And when you said about like the unschooling, especially like younger kids, I mean, we unschool, but we also do still have some curriculum. And I've noticed the kids definitely, the less structured it feels, the more like into it they are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And guidance is huge, and having opportunities is huge. And teaching them how to focus and just geek out on something and just learn it for just because you want to learn it is huge. And it's made a huge difference in my family's lives. And uh, we talk about the geekiest things of all time. Even still, when my family gets together, we everything is regarding ideas and hypotheses and stuff like that. And so just life learning and enjoying learning and not taking that away from the kids.
We went on really long road trips, and we would not have thought that we were studying the geography of the United States, like the states and capitals and major cities. But that's exactly what my dad was doing from the front of the van, just chatting with us. And we, by the time all of us hit kindergarten or first grade, could tell you every state, where it was on the map, its capital, at least two or three major cities, what their approximate populations were. I mean, it would not have felt like we were learning something. We were just chatting about stuff that's worth knowing. And that probably sums up a lot of my upbringing, besides the fact that I was the exact opposite and was in the this is a recording, right? The federal penitentiary.
Yeah.
That's where we went to school. So anyway, we'll talk more about that in a sec.
Yeah, the interest-driven learning is probably my favorite way to teach. I'll just casually drop a random fact, and if the kids latch onto it and want to know more, then we can go into that. And that's been fun. But all right, so my last question for now for Her Majesty is because people like a backstory. Where did the name Queen Bee come from?
That's a little bit political. I I was part of the Libertarian Party, and I was quite involved in it. And I was one of two females with the same first name, and the other one had the last name King, and so they started calling me first name Queen. So it kind of came from the Libertarian Party. So I was trying to figure out a animal avatar that had to do with a queen and for my X handle. And the only thing I could think of was either a queen bee or some other kind of insect, and I like bees better. It's worked really well though, even though I'm not a part of the Libertarian Party anymore. It's worked well because I have my own little hive and I'm buzzing around with my little worker bees, and the visual, it really works well.
Yeah, I like that. And you mentioned the bow tied before, so that's a for the listeners, that's a separate community, and you can just you can Google that. But they're a group of people that specialize in a particular thing, and I've ran into quite a few of them on X, and they're pretty good people, and they're very knowledgeable in their field, and I can definitely tell that you have a definite like a wide array of knowledge in the homeschooling and like all the things surrounding that, and which I'll get to in my intro, but I think we'll jump ahead to Uncle Al here. So same questions. What is your like history or experience with homeschooling or schooling in general?
Right. It begins with not homeschooling. And both my wife and I are standard issue, packaged in the federal penitentiary. I'm sorry, the government education system. Um, and we've also both been teachers. My wife is still a teacher. Her mother was a teacher. My wife has taught everything except for second grade and elementary. And I taught middle school. I taught seventh graders, and I taught both science and literature, ELA language. Um, but for me, it was more like, even though I went through the system, and my wife did too, I probably got as good of an education as I did in spite of the system, not because of it. And my oldest brother, who was valedictorian the year he graduated and has a PhD and is undoubtedly the smartest person I've ever been in the same room with. He says the same thing. He says, there was good education happening in the government education system if you were the one doing it for yourself. And that's obviously more true in college. You would think it would be less true with the younger years, but it's not. It's still, what is the child going to do for him or herself is really what matters. And so even though someone would say, well, I was in school, I would argue that they actually were autodidacts, whether or not they wanted to think that way. Whereas in homeschooling, the more you think that way for your children's sake, the better. And so I was a brilliant underachiever. I was on the A B C D honor roll. I got all the letters. that you could get for grades because I would just not do homework and I would read everything and I would make great grades on tests. I would often break the curve, but I just never turned anything in that was a standard homework. I just didn't have time for it because I was constantly in a bunch of other things. I was in academic decathlon. I was in music. I was my senior year. I was in four orchestras, two jazz bands, a choir, academic decathlon, and like maybe English was the only academic class I was taking. And my experience after that was I was in college for, well, full or part time for 17 and a half years. And I was on the 17 and a half year track and I barely made it. And I spent the entire time just studying what I wanted. While lots of people changed majors, I just added them, added majors or minors so that I could study stuff. In fact, I went to the colleges and wanted to take 3,000 or 4,000 level classes in a department that I wasn't in yet. And they just said, we want to make that for our majors only. And I said, well, can I just declare a minor? And they were like, yeah, I guess you can. So I added maybe two or three philosophy and education. And I mainly studied biochemistry and biomedical sciences. And I ended out with psychology and neuroscience. And it was in those last 3 or 4 or 5 years where I had read Jean Piaget, I had read Carl Jung, I had read um, Erickson. I'd read and studied all that from pretty much in high school. I stumbled into a bunch of that reading, and then the last 4 or 5 years of my college education, I really looked into childhood development, and um, it became very clear to me that the basic education model does not address childhood development properly at all. And you could do a poor job at home, and you'll do a much better job of addressing childhood development and education for those ages. So that was pretty clear to me, having been a person who I wasn't ever a person who thought you shouldn't homeschool. It never occurred to me how necessary and how much better it was until maybe the last 10 years. And my wife and I, we both were teachers. She still is. She teaches at the same school where our two daughters, our two owlets go. And she's going to do that for a little bit longer until we just ditch and do complete homeschooling. But we do homeschooling now. We homeschool all summer. We homeschool at home. Their being at school is not really tied, as far as we're concerned, into their education. They're both scoring within like the top two or three people in their entire grade level because we're way ahead of what everyone's doing for the sake of, academics, but we're much more interested in what they're like as people. Um, there's a bunch more there. Uncle Al, I think you're about to ask maybe where I got the name Uncle Owl. So that
I
actually
was.
is my name, Uncle Owl. My first niece or nephew on my wife's side, it was a nephew, and he shortened my first name and just decided to call me Uncle Owl, and it sounded like he was saying Uncle Owl the bird. And so I kept encouraging that. And about half of my nieces and nephews actually call me Uncle Owl. And so that's not a fake name. I'm not anonymous. That's actually me. And um, I think it's just the classic literature assumption of both being a source of wisdom and the bumbling grandpa who can't shut up, the bumbling uncle who just wants to talk about stories and talk to about anyone about anything. That's exactly how I am. I could talk to anyone about anything they wanted to talk to for hours on end, and I do. And so that's Uncle Al.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Just the symbolism of the symbolism, the right word, symbology. I know you're a wordsmith.
Those both are words fine.
All right.
It's a typology is a good word because in a really good example is people are thinking about wise old owls, and I happen to know a lot about birds, and owls aren't one of the less trainable birds. They're not as smart as other birds. But I think of like owl from Winnie the Pooh. That's the first
Yeah.
owl that comes to my head.
They sure do look smart.
Yes, that's true.
All right. So, I guess it is my turn. Sorry for clearing my throat again. But
Yep, hit it.
yeah, so I'm John, and I am as far as like Hive and Nest goes, my role is more of just helping to stir up conversation. I am very new to the whole homeschooling thing. I have five young kids, two of which are, I'll say, air quotes, school aged. And we kind of jumped into homeschooling because I am a stay-at-home parent, and the reason for homeschooling was that my oldest, she was born at the end of September, so her school cutoff date, she wouldn't have started kindergarten until she was 6 years old. So we decided that we were going to start her a little early because we didn't want to wait that long, and there's no sense in waiting. So we got a couple resources that my wife found online and started teaching her. And it was, for one, so much easier than we thought it would be. For two, she was picking it up very quickly. And for three, we fell in love with it. And through it didn't take very long before we realized like we can do this homeschooling thing. And we kind of just took it and ran with it. And at the time, she was only 5 years old. And so our 3 year old was showing interest in wanting to do some school stuff.
Oh
So,
yeah.
long story short, our 3 year old was reading like basic words, like three-lettered words. And we had this little toy that had, it had blocks on it and it had letters on each side. And no matter which way you turn the blocks, it would spell out a three-letter word. And she was sitting there reading these three-letter words completely unprompted, and we're like, oh, she she picked it up, she knows how to read, how about that? So we loved seeing the progress, and it was so quick, so we just jumped into it. And fast forward to this podcast here, I was on X, and I not sure exactly how I ran into Her Majesty Queen Bee on there, but I think it was through the bow tied community in general. And she must have posted something about homeschooling, and I liked it and followed her. And then I noticed that they were doing spaces, and which we'll get to a little bit later, but these guys do a X space every single Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. But I jumped into one of the spaces and I heard her and Uncle Al talking, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And then I tuned into another one, and then a little bit more of my backstory. I started a podcast almost 2 years ago, and it's a parenting and sobriety based podcast. And so when I heard these guys talking, and I was like, these guys have to have a podcast. And so I asked them if they did. They said no. And I offered my services, and here we are. So my role in this is more like the audience, like a captivated listener, because you guys have a wide breadth of experience in this field. And before I ran into you guys, I was kind of just feeling my way through the dark. We would try different things, different curriculum. The kids liked some of it, hated some of it, and we hated some of it, liked some of it. So I see this as a learning opportunity for myself just as much as anyone listening to this, to kind of soak in the knowledge that uh, Her Majesty and Uncle Al have. So that'll be my role in this endeavor here.
Right on.
And yeah, that's pretty much. So actually, that leads me into my next question: is what got what got you two together? Like, how did you guys end up doing these X spaces?
That starts with Queen Bee.
So, my oldest is old enough to drive now. So, my kids started going to youth group on Wednesday evenings. And at the time, I wasn't working. And so I decided to start a space randomly. It wasn't even about homeschooling. I was just, oh, what's this space thing? I think I'm going to jump on and talk to some people. And I got several listeners, and it seemed like a good time. So I did it the next week.
Was that about
And
a
this,
year ago?
um, no, she got her license in June. So it was in June.
Got it.
Uh, then I just started doing it every week, and then Uncle Owl came on. I've been getting guests to speak, and Uncle Owl came on, and he always had a lot to say, and so I asked him to be on a space one time, and he's got some really good insight in education. and that went really well, and I enjoyed it. And so there was a time where we had some storms here, and I was going through the process of getting a job, and I kind of dropped the spaces for about a month, but I wanted to restart them. So I remembered Uncle Owl and his organization and his ability to speak well. And so I DM'd him and asked if he wanted to start it and start it back up with me. And he said, yeah. So, Uncle Owl, you want to talk about it from your point of view? View?
You don't refuse the queen. I mean, you can't. I mean, my first answer was no because I'm the wrong person, but her response was, well, that's strange. You should just do
All right.
it.
Yeah, just say yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my side is much more sentimental and fills me with tears. Is I was hanging out in X. I've been on X in my real handle since maybe 2009 or so, which was Twitter then. But I wanted to hop into having a profile, based on the owl, where I mostly center on books, but those books could be about anything. I mean, I, I don't like to just toot my own horn, but toot toot. I've read maybe 2,500 or 3,000 books. It's something like that. It's more than 2,000, and I don't think it's five. And some 20 or 30% of those were textbooks, so a huge amount of physics and math. And so I like to talk to people about anything, and I tend to have some source material in books when I'm chatting about stuff. And so I spent the first 6 months really curating my profile. Like I wanted everything to have, AI art, and I wanted it to be very professionally put together, and it took a lot of time. And just like as a thought of the number, the first maybe 7 months, I posted 4,000 posts or replies. And then in the last 6 months, I kind of just said, forget that. I'm just going to wing it and do whatever I want. Um, no pun intended on winging it. And I have like sent out double or triple that number of posts in the same amount of time because I just really enjoyed chatting with people about, especially education or whatever they were arguing about out in the exosphere, which I have coined to myself as being what instead of saying the Twitter sphere or Twitter space or whatever. And so, but I at one point was saying this X spaces thing is pretty unique and special because X is described as the town square. And I think that's right. It's like it's where all of the public conversations are happening. But X Spaces is like if you went to the town square, but then you walked into a space, it's like you walked into a pub or a coffee shop or a little knitting circle at the art supplies store. It's like everyone can get into smaller conversations, based on the conversations that are out in the square. And I felt that that was just a much more comfortable and interesting place to be. But I found that out by I believe this is right. I may have walked into a space or two before, but the first space I went into for the purpose of wanting to listen was Queen Bee's. And it was totally random. I think I met Queen Bee's space through Bowtied Grandma. I was just on BTG Ma's profile when I saw she was in the space, and I thought, okay, I'll join in. And then it was like no time at all. And I'm sitting here thinking, these people are fun. Oh my gosh, she's a second generation homeschooling like dynamo, like the dynasty of the royalty of bees, so to speak, of homeschooling. And I thought this is amazing. And so we talked a lot, and that was like all I want to do is spend my time on spaces. And Queen Bees was particularly my favorite. We also met through your space was we met at Magnetic Norse, the Norseman. He's just such a cool person. We've become very good friends behind the scenes, and uh, he was the one that said, "Hey, you should do things like this. You should get into spaces." And I started doing coffee with your Uncle Al, which, by the way, is an open invitation to anyone. Come have coffee with your Uncle Al on X Spaces. And then then Queen Bee approached after there was about a 2 or 3 week hiatus of not having the weekly X space for homeschooling, and she said, "Would you like to co-host?" And of course, I ran to my room sobbing in tears because I was so excited and couldn't believe it's actually happening to me. But I mean it because it's fun to talk about. This is one of my, if not the most important thing happening right now. I think a lot of people are watching the political landscape. They're watching the American system, the situation here, the UK, lots of Europe. And I think a lot of people have answers for what is the most fundamentally necessary thing that needs to happen next. And I personally think it's everyone should homeschool because if everyone homeschooled, then you can raise your children with your own way of thinking. And you could do a bad job of homeschooling, and you will do a better job than most of the government education. And you will have instilled in them your way of being a person. I think one generation from now, the entire world would benefit if that's what we did. And so I thought, this is it. Let's just stick with that.
So I became a little disenfranchised with the Libertarian Party, and I think that was because it's my it's too broad for me. And I decided that the best way for me to actually have a positive impact in the world was to help people homeschool. So I completely agree with Uncle Owl. I
Yep.
think that that's the way we're going to change. We have to start very, very grassroots within the family. And I believe that this is the wave of the future for anything good that happens in the world is
And
people homeschooling.
I don't even think that's last resort. That's like where we should have started anyway. And it's
Agree.
going to have the best outcome.
Agree. Completely agree.
Yeah, if you want to change the world, you should start with changing your world, and having your kids and your family is basically your whole world. So
I love
I
that.
agree with that as well.
And then just
Oh, go ahead.
and anecdotally, my family, my family is doing a lot of cool things. Like my brother is adopting two little girls, and my family does things that are like world-changing things on a small level. And if we can get everybody doing that, oh my gosh.
Yeah. A sense of community is very important. And if everyone had, started inward and fixed their, immediate community, which is your family, and then branching out, I mean, I've seen the camaraderie among homeschoolers here, and there's nothing quite like it. Like you don't, my kids get along better with other homeschooled kids than they do public school kids. And sorry, I had to clear my throat again. I'll edit that out.
You're good.
Uh, but yeah, they kind of just gravitate towards each other, and the they just get a better bond because they're able to play together whenever during the day when all the other kids are off at school. My daughters will ask like, "Hey, is so and so home?" And I'm like, "What day is it?" And they'll be like, "It's Tuesday." I'm like, "Are they home?" "No, they're at school." I'm like, "Exactly." So then they go knock on the door of the little boy down the street who is also homeschooled, and they're just able to build those bonds, and they kind of just innately gravitate towards each other, even out in the world. Most of my kids' friends that they've made at like the gym, daycare and stuff are all homeschooled kids. So it's just it definitely builds a sense of community in your kids to want to like that kind of that's how it throws the whole socialization myth out the door for me, is that
Yep.
my kids have no problem making friends, and we're going to upload those X spaces about the socialization issue. But I wanted to circle back real quick to one thing you said, coffee with your Uncle Owl on X. When is that? Is that like a set thing or?
No, I get a chance to invite someone or they have show interest in wanting to spend time in a space and we just work out the time. And it's usually designed to be a little bit more curated of a space. So it's mostly I just want to have a conversation with them. I mean, most people don't have enough time to just chat about what they do and what they're interested in. And that's mostly what it's about. So I probably only talk to them or maybe one or two other people. And then we just upload it as a recording. But that's available to anyone who wants to come chat. And usually people have some, thing that they're doing out on X, and so they want to talk about it, and so do I. But no, it's not a
Okay,
set time or a date. Um,
awesome.
and to also just throw in the happy accident of Queen Bee choosing Queen Bee, when we were talking about what to do with the space itself and thinking about the podcast, like the idea of the beehive and the owl's nest was pretty obvious as how good homeschooling feels. And I just appreciated your nod to community. And um, it's impossible to make a contrast. I mean, you cannot juxtapose them more between the comfort of the federal penitentiary box on the street versus schooling your kids at home in your own particular hive or nest. That's exactly where it should be done anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, I he got to one of my other questions. I was, the backstory behind the name Hive and Nest, but yeah, it's pretty when you think about it, it's pretty obvious that you're, keeping the kids in the nest, so to speak, or cultivating a hive. And yeah, that I like the symbolism there with the queen bee and the uncle owl.
The
Um,
purpose of the hive is to buzz about and have fun. The purpose of the nest is to make a comfortable place until you kick them out of it.
that's true. So
Nice.
my next one is, what do you guys have like let's say a goal or intention with Hive and Nest? Like where do you, what is your primary goal with these spaces? I know that Queen Bee alluded to it a little bit, but like your mission, so to speak, with between these spaces and this podcast, like if you could sum it up into like one small thought, like what are you guys trying to accomplish?
You first.
For me personally, my goal in life is to help people homeschool and to make homeschooling work for them. I often hear, "Oh, well, not everybody can homeschool," and I believe that that's a misnomer. And I want to help people figure out how they can. And so my goal for the podcast is to make it accessible, make homeschooling accessible for people.
Come join us in
Love
the
it.
hive and nest to thrive and be your best, and to live and raise our kids up unto the freedom with which we've been blessed. We are hive and nest homeschool. That is undoubtedly the goal. And actually, I really appreciated John's story at the beginning, um, of how he dabbled into getting into homeschool, and he and his wife basically just they were winging it. And I think Her Majesty Queen Bee is the champion of go with the flow homeschooling. It does not require a degree. It does not require extensive training. It is doable by everyone who does or does not think that it's doable by them, because it's honestly it just takes a little bit of getting into it and figuring things out, and you'll make mistakes and you won't like some of it, and it won't matter a bit because there's lots of time to get it right and have a good time and take care of your family.
Agreed. I love that. All right. So I think we're going to start winding this particular episode down. But before we go, you guys have already said a bunch of awesome things, things that got me thinking. But we're going to have like this little useful information segment. So both of you can answer this, starting with obviously Her Majesty first. So, what is a good first step you can take to start your homeschooling journey if you're not currently homeschooling your kids?
So I think a good first step would be to start homeschooling them even though they're going to school. So in, introduce them to things that like math type things or play type thing. I'm just things, extracurricular things. Just try your hand at homeschooling after hours. But I wouldn't go too much with worksheets. I would do things that are more hands-on activities, going to museums, just trying to look for things like that are schooly, if you will. For example, like visit a history museum and teach your kids the local history on the weekends, or count beans and or count money and things like that, things that aren't things that they seem interested in. Go with that.
How can
Bake
you say you're doing
cookies.
school if you're not doing worksheets? I mean,
Yeah. Don't sit at a table and do worksheets. I never recommend that unless kids are actually asking for worksheets, which my kids have asked for worksheets before, so that happens, but I never recommend that otherwise. But
All right,
yeah,
so more practical learning.
yeah, do some hands-on stuff with them and maybe even start categorizing that in your mind. Like I said, taking them to a history museum or taking them to a nature and science museum and exploring the human body area. That my kids at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, my kids loved the human body area. And so we would go there and explore different facets of what they presented. And that would be our science curriculum. So doing things like that on the weekends or holidays with the kids, that's how I would start with homeschooling so that you realize how much you are actually teaching your kids before you take them out. I think it would make the hurdle easier
I'm
when you do
gonna
take them out.
I'm gonna add my own, but before I do that, I'm gonna double down on what Her Majesty just said, which is you have test ground for homeschooling, and one of them is the summers. If you nights and weekends and holidays you find time to consider, okay, how would I directly address a homeschooled education? But also in the summer, you'll see how much free time they have during the day and how little time it takes to address something from an academic perspective, and still be tracking along, still move along and move ahead in what they could learn. And you there's a big juxtaposition there as well to how long it takes to address very fundamental education and academics, especially at a young age, versus the fact that they're there at the federal penitentiary. I'm sorry, the government education box down on the street for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, as if they're doing a full-time job. And you just my biggest realization was like, what are they doing with all that time? And the answer is nothing. They're doing nothing worthwhile with all that time. And so at home, they could be doing all sorts of nothing, or they could be doing a number of other things that are far more worthwhile. And then you can add in what Her Majesty just said with realizing that you now get to take them places that are educational and you get to immerse them into interesting things. And that's a far better way to think about how to teach and expose and help explore with your children's education. But I was going to add just my basic thing is read to your children every single day. Every single day, one or both of you who are parents, and to the single parents, you just have to deal with it. Invite a friend over, it doesn't matter. Read to your children every single day. And I don't know when that ends. Like, I'm not saying there's like a cutoff time, maybe when they're in their teens and they don't want to hear you reading any more stories directly to them every single day. That's fine. But in the early years, read to your children every single day is one of the ways that you will discover that your participation in their learning is really just about being with them. And it's not about the context of an academic or educational pursuit. It's just being with them that will teach and train them and help them be smarter, more interesting, more, better humans, better people, more thoughtful. The benefits of reading to your child every day are well known for being a massive advantage for success later in life.
Great, thank you for that. And I will third the going places thing. We have a membership to the zoo. We have a membership to it's called OMSI, which is a science museum. And we have a membership that kind of gets us into all the different children's museums all over the Northwest here. And we go as often as possible. And the kids always seem to latch on to some new factoid or something, and we come home and we talk about it. So going places is um, definitely high up on our list as well.
Excellent.
And so we're gonna move on to what is one useful resource that you use for homeschooling, starting with Her Majesty.
My favorite go-to that I tell everybody to buy, it's like people DM me and ask, "Oh, what can I do?" And my favorite is a book called The Three R's, and it's by Ruth Beechick, Beechick. I don't know this lady personally, and I think she actually passed away, but it's a very inexpensive book, and it's very small and easy to read. And it will get you from it will teach you how to teach your kids to read, how to teach them math, and um, how to write, basically. And it's all kind of in a natural way so that it's not super structured and frustrating for the child. And I highly recommend that if you're a child, if you're just starting out kindergarten through third grade, which is funny to even say kindergarten through third grade because if you're actually a homeschooler, you know that grades aren't a thing. Grades
Stop
don't.
it.
So the reason my son is in middle school is because he wanted to go to youth group, and so they asked what grade he was in, and I said whatever grade he needs to be in to go to youth group. So, but yeah, kindergarten through third grade. So the book is called The Three R's by Ruth Beachchick, and I highly recommend that.
All right, I'll be sure to add that to the show notes for anyone that's interested in checking that out. All right, Uncle Owl,
Oh,
same
right.
question.
Yeah. So I'm going to go extracurricular on this, and it's all of the directed draw videos on YouTube. For kids, there are so many great channels. There's even this one great channel. I'd love to give him a proper shout out, but I don't even remember his YouTube channel name, where it's this dad with his daughter and they do directed draws of anything. And I remember when my daughter, our older daughter, she's 8.37 years old now, and she was about 4, and she just was on the computer, which we don't let her use the computer by herself, but she was watching something, and then she said, "How do you use this?" And so I typed in "kids draw," and then I saw the word directed, and I remembered watching a couple of these myself, and my girls could spend half of the day doing directed draw art from these teachers on YouTube, and the result has been my daughter has a couple of watercolor paintings that I could probably sell for hundreds of dollars. They are incredible, and it's insane how simple that was. So that was me saying that, remember, the education of your children is not entirely about numbers and letters as much as the owl wants you to be reading every book all day long. Um, some of it is just how to do stuff that makes you feel good about yourself, how to do stuff that helps you be, the old classic word was accomplished. Accomplished at what? Accomplished at knitting, accomplished at a musical instrument, accomplished at art, painting, drawing, accomplished at speaking other languages. The resources available is near infinite for that sort of thing. And so directed draws on YouTube, I would strongly recommend people to do that with their children. I would say maybe possibly girls tend to like that a little bit more than boys. But my girls eat that up for sure.
That's awesome. My oldest is very into drawing right now, so I'll definitely have to check that out. Um, I actually have to go grab my 3-month old. He is awake and waking, trying to wake everybody else up. So I will throw in one more question that I didn't ask before. Do you guys have like a set schedule for what you plan on talking about in the X spaces moving forward? I know right now we're on socialization.
You're up or am I up?
Whoever wants to take this one.
I'm not saying I'm the more organized of the two of us, but
For sure, you're up. I'm cowering over here with that question.
so the beginning of the year, the very first X Space was January 1st. It was a Wednesday. We decided to direct the first few weeks of X Spaces to be we want to talk about homeschooling. We want to talk about the top excuses for why people don't homeschool. Um, and we want to get to the things that actually matter. Like there are some questions about what you should be thinking about, the planning that should go into you and your family deciding to homeschool. And they will take time and energy. They will take, mental ability, and they will take decision making. And those things actually do matter. But the most common excuses for why people don't homeschool, I believe, are just that. They're excuses to not take the decision seriously and think about the important things that you should think about. It's just to dismiss the whole endeavor entirely. And the top two, or you could say the worst two, and I don't know which one's number one or number two, or last place or second to last place. It's socialization, the concern for homeschool children and their socialization, and curriculum. Both of those are not only both of those are not only bad excuses. They are anti-truths. To say that your trouble with your children homeschooling is going to be you're concerned about whether or not they're going to be properly socialized. That's an anti-truth. They will be significantly better socialized at home than they will be at the federal penitentiary. And the curriculum is also an anti-truth because the main thing that you will recognize if you have your children at home with you is that the 90% of what they learn prior to age 7 or 8 is how to be a human. And that's not a curriculum. That's something you learn by virtue of being a human. And so you as parents, you want to get curriculum in there. You want to discuss math. You want to discuss reading. You want to get them interested in science and explore and be exposed to all sorts of wonderful things that, from an academic perspective, are about learning. But mostly, what they're learning is how to be a good person. And so that's something that's not even covered in federal penitentiaries. But at home, that's the natural state. And so both of those, we wanted to spend a few weeks addressing both of those. We just spent, I think, 2 or 3 sessions talking about socialization, and I believe going forward, we're going to be discussing a few weeks of the concern of curriculum, and then after that, we're going to start talking about, hey, now that we've busted the top two excuses, what are the main things you should be thinking about? And it'll include some suggestions very similar to what we were just talking about before, like using the space outside of if your kids are currently in school, nights and weekends and holidays and the summers to attempt, to practice, to get your feet wet and figure out how that's going to go. I mean, most of you should just jump in the deep end and just do it and don't worry about what I just said because it'll probably go fine. But on the other hand, if you want to methodically give yourself some steps into it, there's ways to do it, and we want to talk about that coming soon.
Can I also just say what Uncle Al was just talking about?
Yeah.
That's a lot of the reason that I asked him to co-host with me is because he has the same education philosophy that I do, but I'm just not as good as putting it into words.
Stop it.
But but I mean, truly, your children are learning how to become humans. I think we expect a lot of kids. We're so focused on academics and getting straight A's in math that we completely neglect being a good human. And that's what kids are learning. And if you're able to teach your kid how to walk and how to eat with a fork and how to conduct themselves properly in say church or in an amusement park and what the difference between those two are, that's the type of stuff they're actually learning and that they need to learn. And you can add things like classic literature on top of that. But yeah, that's exactly what drew me to have Uncle Owl is his education philosophy is amazing
And
to
we
me.
came that at that same conclusion from basically the opposite ends of this discussion because I was completely in the federal penitentiary system and you were completely not in the federal penitentiary system. And the thing that you just said that I wanted to highlight was there's lots of time for the academics, for the math, for the science. There's lots of time. You know what there's not very much time for is raising good children. There's very little time for that because a few weeks go by, a few months go by, a few years go by, and they've doubled and tripled in size. And so has their brain, and so has their behaviors and everything. And if you haven't settled in how to be a decent human, that's hard to remediate. Whereas there's plenty of time to get them better at algebra.
And that's evidenced by our current society that's full of kids who went to public school that don't know how to behave in a public setting. Lots of
Boom.
adults that don't know how to behave in a public setting.
I can attest to that. Being from where I'm at, there's a lot of, I would say, aimless young adults that have too much time on their hands that cause trouble around these parts. So, but that's a story for a different podcast, different genre, different day. But as far as them getting bigger rapidly, I can attest to that too because I've got my almost 4 month old here now. So if you hear any squeeze or any weird baby noises, that was not me. That
Did
was
you just say
him.
weird? Is
Love
that right?
it.
Yeah,
I want to
right.
hear.
Yeah.
Oh,
I love babies.
I'm sure he will say hi, won't you? He's just staring at the mic right now. But all right, so I think seeing as how the children are starting to awaken, I think we'll be moving into our closing. So I was hoping that you guys, and I will be adding all these to the show notes as well. But could you guys shout out your social handles, so your X handles, so people know where to find you and
Your
find our
Majesty, you
spaces?
first.
Bow-tied Queen Bee. Um, that's it. Bow-tied Queen Bee on Twitter or on X, I should say.
And send us DMs at Bowtied Queen
Please do.
Bee. Please, you can ask us questions. You can prompt us for the next space. Hey, could you guys talk about this? We would love to do that. Me as well. So mine is at Uncle Al on X. And just for fun, there's also at Aunt Owlette on X. That's Mrs. Owl. She's out here. And we are going to be adding the at Hive and Nest. Is it Hive and Nest Pod or Hive and Nest HS Homeschool? Is that what it is, John?
Yeah, Hive and Nest HS, all lowercase, all one word, obviously, because it's a X handle. But yeah, Hive
Perfect.
and Nest HS.
And we have a weekly Wednesday. It's Wednesday evening, 1900 Eastern time at the at Bowtine Queen Bee. She also has recordings of all of our X spaces. We have them available. We are going to also upload them to our podcast account so you can see them all in one spot as we go forward. We're going to keep recording these as well as recording more podcasts where we can dive deeper into some of this together. And you can send us emails. Your Uncle Al at protonmail.com. You can send us emails at hiveandnest at pm.me. Come see us at Hive and Nest. Where's the podcast? This sounds silly for me not to even remember. We're uploading it to which platform?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Boom. I love that.
And there's also, it is Hive and Nest podcast at gmail.com is another one. And like I said, I'll put all these in the show notes. So feel no obligation to memorize all this.
There's a test at the end of the week.
Yeah. All right. So this brings us into the end. So, Your Majesty, do you have any parting remarks or anything you want to leave us with until next time?
Yeah, sure. I just want to encourage everybody to think about homeschooling seriously and consider if it's I if it's something that you could do, and if you have any questions or if you have any um issues or anything, do please DM us at our profiles. And I would just like to encourage everybody to homeschool. Yeah, that's about it.
And from me,
Great.
it's just a thank you. Thank you all so much for your time. I'm honestly shocked and surprised that anybody at all wants to listen to what we have to say. But on the other hand, this is important, and people are needing this, and there are some things that are happening in our immediate and further future that your whole family and you and your children will benefit from if you take some of these things seriously. It's time to take some of this seriously, and we just thank you all for your time.
Awesome. And I want to thank you guys for your time as well and for agreeing to do this with me. I've learned a lot today and I look forward to learning a lot going forward. And
Yes,
I
sir.
will
Thank
just
you.
say, oh, good. Sorry. Yeah. I'll just say, to our listeners, please give this a listen. This is our first episode or introduction, and then we are going to upload some X Spaces and some other ones, and go ahead and give those episodes a listen. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening to it or watching it on. And please feel free to share it out with other people. Follow us on X. And like I said, I will have everything in the show notes. So all the links, resources, the book that Queen Bee talked about, everything will be in the show notes for you to quickly find. Oh, little man. And with that, I will say goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.